Have you ever had that moment where your entire world shifts, where you suddenly see everything clearly for the first time, and you realize that the person standing next to you, the one you promised forever to, is actually a stranger wearing a mask? Well, that moment came for me on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, my wedding day. And the humiliation I experienced in front of everyone I loved was just the beginning of a nightmare I almost didn't escape from. My name doesn't matter. What matters is my story. Because if you're watching this right now, maybe you need to hear it. Maybe you're seeing signs you're trying to ignore. Maybe someone you love is going through something similar. And I'm here to tell you that those gut feelings, those little voices in your head telling you something is wrong, they're not crazy, they're not overreacting, they're trying to save your life. I want you to close your eyes for a second and imagine standing in a beautiful venue, wearing the dress you've dreamed about since you were a little girl, surrounded by flowers and music and all the people who matter most to you. And then imagine the man you're about to marry, the one who's supposed to love and cherish you, deliberately humiliating you in front of everyone. And imagine the sound of awkward laughter, the confused faces, the way your mother's smile freezes on her face, and imagine having to make a decision right there, right then, about whether to laugh it off or run away, and imagine choosing to stay because you've already invested so much, because everyone is watching, because surely he didn't mean it that way, because you don't want to be dramatic or ruin everyone's day. That was me 3 years ago, and I can still feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the way my hands trembled as I held my bouquet, the sick feeling in the pit of my stomach that told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But I smiled through it. I laughed along with everyone else. I told myself it was just nerves, just his sense of humor, just a one-time thing that didn't mean anything deeper. I've spent so much time since then wondering how I got there, how I let myself become someone who accepted being treated that way. And the truth is, it didn't start on my wedding day. It started months before, years before even, with little comments and small moments that I brushed off, with boundaries that slowly dissolved, with my own voice getting quieter and quieter until I barely recognized myself anymore. See, when I first met Marcus, that's not his real name, but it's what I'll call him here. I thought I had won the lottery. I genuinely believed I had found my soulmate, my person, the one who would make everything make sense. And he was charming in a way that made everyone around him light up. He had this magnetic personality that drew people in. He was successful and ambitious and intelligent. And when he focused his attention on me, I felt like the most special person in the world. Like I had been chosen for something extraordinary. Like my life was finally beginning the way it was supposed to. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party. One of those situations where you lock eyes across a crowded room and something just clicks. And I remember he approached me with this confident smile and asked if I believed in love at first sight. And normally I would have rolled my eyes at such a cheesy line. But coming from him, it felt sincere. It felt real. It felt like the universe was finally giving me what I had been waiting for. We talked for hours that night, long after everyone else had left, sitting on the front steps of our friend's building, sharing stories about our childhoods and our dreams and our fears. And he told me about his difficult relationship with his father, about how he had to fight for everything he had, about how he just wanted to build a life with someone who really understood him. And I felt this overwhelming compassion for him, this desire to be the person who could give him the love and understanding he had been missing. Looking back now, I can see how carefully he was crafting a narrative, how strategically he was positioning himself as both strong and vulnerable, successful yet wounded, someone who needed saving but could also be a savior. But at the time, I just felt lucky. I felt chosen. I felt like finally someone saw me the way I wanted to be seen. The first few months were absolutely intoxicating. We spent every possible moment together. He would show up at my apartment with flowers and takeout from my favorite restaurant. He would send me long text messages in the middle of the day telling me how he couldn't stop thinking about me, how I made him want to be a better person, how he had never felt this way before. And God, I ate it up. I believed every word. I let myself fall completely and totally, without any safety net, without any reservation, without listening to that tiny voice in the back of my mind that occasionally whispered that this was too intense, too fast, too consuming. My best friend Sarah, bless her heart, she tried to warn me. She said things like, maybe you should slow down a bit. Maybe you should keep some independence. Maybe you should make sure you're not losing yourself in this relationship. But I dismissed her concerns as jealousy or cynicism. I told myself she just didn't understand what Marcus and I had, that she had never experienced this kind of connection. that she would feel differently if she could see how he looked at me, how he held me, how he made me feel like I was finally home after a lifetime of wandering. The first real warning sign came about 4 months into our relationship. We were at a dinner party with some of his colleagues from work, successful people with impressive titles and expensive watches, and I was already feeling a bit out of my depth, trying to contribute to conversations about markets and mergers and things I only vaguely understood. And at one point, I made a comment about an article I had read, something about economic policy, and I could see immediately from Marcus's face that I had said something wrong, that I had embarrassed him somehow. And later in the car on the way home, he said to me in this very calm, very controlled voice, "You know, you really shouldn't talk about things you don't understand. It makes you look foolish, and it reflects poorly on me." And I felt this rush of shame wash over me, this feeling that I had let him down, that I needed to be better, smarter, more careful. And instead of being angry at him for speaking to me that way, I apologized. I actually apologized for embarrassing him, and I promised to be more mindful in the future. That should have been my exit ramp. That should have been the moment I recognized that something was fundamentally wrong, that someone who truly loved me wouldn't speak to me like a child who needed correction, wouldn't prioritize his image over my feelings, wouldn't make me feel small and stupid for simply participating in a conversation. But instead, I internalized his criticism. I made it about my inadequacy rather than his cruelty. And that pattern, that terrible pattern of accepting blame for his mistreatment, would repeat itself over and over again in increasingly damaging ways. Have you ever been in a relationship where you felt like you were constantly walking on eggshells, never quite sure what would set off your partner, always trying to anticipate their needs and moods and reactions? Comment below if this resonates with you, because I want you to know you're not alone, and I want you to know that it's not normal. It's not love. It's not what you deserve. After that dinner party incident, I became more careful about what I said and how I said it. Especially in public, especially around his friends and colleagues. I started editing myself, filtering my thoughts through the lens of how Marcus might perceive them, whether they would make him proud or embarrass him, whether they would reflect well on him or poorly, and without even realizing it, I was slowly erasing myself, becoming smaller and quieter and less substantial, molding myself into the shape of the partner he wanted rather than being the person I actually was. 6 months into our relationship, he proposed, and it was grand and romantic and public. He took me to this beautiful restaurant overlooking the water, and halfway through dinner, a violinist started playing. And Marcus got down on one knee with this stunning ring, and everyone in the restaurant was watching and smiling. And I felt this pressure to perform, to be the joyful, surprised, grateful girlfriend who says yes without hesitation. And of course I said yes, of course I did. Because how could I say no with all those people watching? With Marcus looking up at me with such apparent devotion, with the weight of expectation pressing down on me from every direction. But even as I said yes, even as I cried happy tears and hugged him and accepted congratulations from strangers, there was this knot in my stomach, this sense that I was making a mistake, that I was stepping onto a path I wouldn't be able to get off of. But I pushed those feelings down. I told myself it was just cold feet, just normal pre-engagement jitters, just my own fear of commitment and happiness and getting what I wanted. The wedding planning process revealed more and more of who Marcus really was, but I kept making excuses, kept explaining away his behavior, kept telling myself that wedding planning is stressful for everyone, that it brings out the worst in people temporarily, that once we were married, things would settle down, and he would go back to being the charming, attentive man I had fallen in love with. He had opinions about everything regarding the wedding. Strong opinions that he presented not as preferences but as facts, as the obviously correct way to do things. And if I disagreed or wanted something different, he would sigh dramatically and say things like, "I'm just trying to make sure we don't look ridiculous. I thought you trusted my judgment. Do you really want our wedding to be tacky?" And somehow by the end of these conversations, I would find myself apologizing and agreeing to his vision, even when it meant giving up things that mattered to me. I wanted a small, intimate ceremony with just close family and friends, maybe 50 people maximum, somewhere outdoors with natural beauty and a relaxed atmosphere. But Marcus insisted we needed a big wedding, at least 200 guests, in a prestigious venue that would impress people, with a formal sit-down dinner and a live band, and all the traditional elements that signaled success and status. And when I tried to explain that I didn't feel comfortable being the center of attention for such a large production, that I wanted something more personal and meaningful, he looked at me with such disappointment and said, "This is important to me. This is about starting our life together the right way, showing the world what we're building, And don't you want to make me happy? Don't you want to give me this one thing? And the way he framed it made me feel selfish for having my own desires, made me feel like I was being difficult and unsupportive. So I gave in. I agreed to the big wedding, the formal venue, the hundreds of guests I barely knew, and with each compromise I made, I lost a little more of myself, became a little more of a prop in his narrative, rather than an active participant in my own life. My family noticed the changes in me. My mother pulled me aside one day during a dress fitting and asked if I was happy, really, truly happy. And I assured her that I was just stressed about the wedding planning, that everything was fine, that Marcus was wonderful, and I was lucky to have found him. And I could see in her eyes that she didn't quite believe me, but she didn't push. And I wonder now if things would have been different if she had, if someone had pushed harder, had forced me to really examine what I was doing and why. The warning signs kept coming, kept multiplying, kept getting harder to ignore. There was the time he got angry at me for wearing a dress he thought was too revealing to a friend's party, telling me I was practically begging for male attention, embarrassing him with my desperate need for validation. And instead of recognizing this as controlling and abusive behavior, I changed my clothes. I apologized for my poor judgment. I promised to be more modest in the future. There was the time he went through my phone while I was in the shower, and when I discovered what he had done and got upset, he turned it around on me, asking why I was so defensive unless I had something to hide, telling me that couples shouldn't have secrets, that my reaction proved I couldn't be trusted. And again, somehow by the end of that conversation, I was the one apologizing. I was the one promising to be more transparent. I was the one who felt guilty even though he had violated my privacy. Each incident by itself could maybe be rationalized or explained away, could be attributed to stress or miscommunication or different relationship expectations, but together they formed a pattern, a clear and undeniable pattern of control and manipulation and emotional abuse, and yet I refused to see it. Or maybe I saw it but couldn't admit it, couldn't face what it meant, couldn't accept that I had made such a terrible mistake in choosing this person to build a life with. The weeks leading up to the wedding were absolutely chaotic. Marcus became increasingly demanding and critical. Nothing I did was good enough. Every decision I made was wrong. Every effort I put forth was insufficient. And I found myself crying more than I was smiling, feeling anxious and exhausted rather than excited and joyful. But everyone kept telling me that wedding planning is hard on couples, that it's a test you have to get through, that things would be better once the wedding was over, and we could just focus on being married. So I kept going, kept pushing through, kept telling myself that this was temporary, that our marriage would be different, that the real Marcus would come back once the pressure was off. 2 weeks before the wedding, we had a massive fight about the seating arrangements. I had put my divorced parents at separate tables to avoid any awkwardness or tension, and Marcus insisted they should sit together because it looked bad to have them separated, as if our families were dysfunctional. And when I tried to explain the complex dynamics and the very real possibility of them causing a scene if forced to sit together, he accused me of being dramatic, of caring more about my parents' feelings than about our wedding looking perfect. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Sometimes I wonder if you're mature enough to be getting married, if you're capable of putting our partnership first." And those words hit me like a physical blow, made me question everything about myself, made me feel inadequate and childish and wrong. I should have called off the wedding right then. I should have recognized that his words were designed to undermine my confidence, to make me doubt my own perceptions and judgments, to keep me off balance and compliant. But instead I agreed to his seating arrangement. I prioritized his comfort over my own wisdom. I set myself up for the disaster that would inevitably unfold, and sure enough, my parents ended up having a loud argument during dinner that embarrassed everyone and created exactly the scene I had tried to prevent, and Marcus was furious with me, as if I had orchestrated their fight, as if their behavior was somehow my fault. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with this sense of dread sitting heavy in my chest, this feeling that I was making an irreversible mistake. And I remember sitting on the edge of my hotel bed, still in my pajamas, seriously considering calling the whole thing off, just canceling everything and dealing with the consequences. But then my bridesmaids arrived with champagne and breakfast and excitement, and my mother came in with tears in her eyes talking about how beautiful I was going to look. And everyone was so happy and supportive and invested in this day happening. And I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing all these people, of wasting all their time and money and emotional energy, of admitting that I had been wrong, that I had ignored all the warning signs, that I was about to marry someone who didn't truly respect or value me. Getting ready for the ceremony felt surreal, like I was watching myself from outside my body, going through the motions of having my hair and makeup done, stepping into my dress, putting on my jewelry, smiling for photos, but not really being present, not really being there. And I kept thinking about how I had imagined this day when I was younger, how I had pictured feeling excited and joyful and certain, and instead I felt numb and terrified and trapped. The ceremony itself started off smoothly enough. I walked down the aisle with my father, saw Marcus waiting for me at the altar looking handsome and confident, and for a brief moment I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe this was just normal cold feet and everything was going to be fine. But then we got to the vows, and Marcus decided to go off script. And what happened next changed everything, confirmed every doubt I had been trying to suppress, validated every warning sign I had been trying to ignore. Instead of saying the traditional vows we had agreed on, Marcus launched into this speech that started off seemingly romantic but quickly turned into something else, something that made my blood run cold even as everyone around us laughed, thinking it was charming, thinking it was funny, not realizing they were witnessing the beginning of my nightmare. He said, "I promise to love and cherish you, to be patient with you as you grow up and learn how to be a proper wife." And people chuckled, thinking he was being playfully teasing, not seeing the serious glint in his eyes, not hearing the underlying message. And he continued, "I promise to guide you and teach you and help you become the woman I know you can be. Because let's face it, you need a lot of work." And there were more laughs, more people thinking this was all in good fun, all part of his personality. But I could feel the humiliation burning through me, could feel every cell in my body screaming that this was wrong, that this wasn't love, that this wasn't how you speak to someone you're supposed to cherish and honor. He kept going, talking about my flaws and shortcomings disguised as jokes, pointing out my tendency to be emotional, my supposed inability to make good decisions without his input, my need for constant guidance and correction, and with each word I felt smaller, more exposed, more humiliated. And I looked out at the crowd and saw some people looking uncomfortable. Saw my best friend Sarah with tears in her eyes and anger on her face. Saw my mother gripping my father's hand so tightly, her knuckles were white, but I also saw people laughing, people smiling, people thinking this was endearing somehow. And I realized in that moment that this was Marcus's genius. He could abuse me in public and make it look like humor, could tear me down while appearing to build me up, could humiliate me while seeming charming and self-deprecating. The officiant looked uncomfortable too, kept glancing at me as if asking if I wanted to stop this, if I needed an intervention, but I stood there frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except endure. And when it was finally my turn to say my vows, my voice came out small and shaky, barely audible, and I just said the traditional words we had agreed on. "I promise to love and honor you, to be faithful and true," and compared to his elaborate speech, mine sounded boring and inadequate, which I'm sure was part of his plan, to make himself look entertaining and charismatic while making me look dull and simple. When the officiant pronounced us married and Marcus kissed me, I felt nothing. No joy, no excitement, no sense of beginning something wonderful. Just this hollow emptiness and the knowledge that I had just legally bound myself to someone who would spend our marriage trying to diminish me, trying to control me, trying to remake me into his image of what a wife should be. The reception was torture. Person after person came up to me and made jokes about Marcus's vows, about how funny he was, about how lucky I was to have someone with such a great sense of humor, and I had to smile and laugh and pretend that I hadn't just been humiliated in front of everyone I loved, had to act like everything was fine, like this was normal, like being mocked by your husband during your wedding vows was cute and charming rather than cruel and demeaning. Sarah pulled me aside during dinner and asked if I was okay, and I could see in her eyes that she knew I wasn't, that she had seen what really happened up there. And she said, "We can leave right now. We can get you out of here. You don't have to go through with this." But I was already married, already committed, already trapped by my own inability to admit I had made a mistake, and I told her I was fine, that she was overreacting, that Marcus just has a different sense of humor than we're used to. And I watched her heart break for me, watched her realize that I was choosing to stay, choosing to accept this treatment, choosing him over my own dignity and well-being. My mother also tried to talk to me, pulling me into a quiet corner and saying that what happened during the ceremony wasn't okay, that no man who truly loves you would speak to you that way, especially not in front of everyone you know, and she offered to help me get it annulled, said it wasn't too late to change my mind. But I was so deep in denial, so committed to making this work, so unable to face the shame and embarrassment of admitting failure, that I defended him. I made excuses for him. I told her she was being too sensitive, that she didn't understand our dynamic, that Marcus and I were fine and she needed to let it go. Looking back, that was one of the moments I regret most. Pushing away the people who were trying to help me. Choosing the man who was hurting me over the people who actually loved me. And I know now that's exactly what abusers do. They isolate you from your support system. They make you choose them over everyone else. They make you feel like you're the crazy one for being hurt by their behavior. And Marcus was a master at it. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. I drank too much champagne trying to numb the pain and confusion. I danced and smiled and cut the cake and threw the bouquet. I played the happy bride role perfectly. And all the while, I felt like I was drowning, like I was watching my life slip away from me, like I was becoming someone I didn't recognize and didn't particularly like. When we finally left the reception and got to the hotel room, I thought maybe we could talk about what happened. Maybe Marcus would apologize and explain that he had just been nervous and made a mistake. Maybe we could address the obvious problem and figure out how to move forward. But instead, he acted like nothing unusual had happened, like publicly humiliating me was perfectly acceptable behavior. And when I tried to bring it up, when I said that his vows had hurt my feelings and embarrassed me, he turned it around immediately, saying I was being oversensitive, that everyone thought it was funny except me, that I needed to learn to take a joke, that my inability to laugh at myself was a character flaw I needed to work on. That night set the tone for our entire marriage. Marcus acting like his behavior was normal, and my reaction to it was the problem. Him gaslighting me into questioning my own perceptions and feelings, making me feel like I was crazy for being hurt by things that were obviously hurtful, and I started to lose touch with reality a little bit, started to doubt my own judgment so much that I couldn't trust my own thoughts and feelings, couldn't differentiate between what was real and what he told me was real. The honeymoon was supposed to be in Greece, 2 weeks of island hopping and relaxation and romance, but it turned into another exercise in control and criticism. Marcus had planned every single detail without my input. Every restaurant, every activity, every moment of every day was scheduled according to his preferences, and when I suggested maybe we could be a bit more spontaneous, maybe explore on our own and discover things together, he looked at me like I was being ridiculous, like the very idea of deviating from his carefully constructed itinerary was absurd and irresponsible. On the third day of the honeymoon, I wanted to spend the afternoon at the beach, just relaxing and enjoying the sun and the water, but Marcus had planned for us to take a boat tour, and when I expressed my preference, when I asked if maybe we could skip the tour just this once and do what I wanted to do, he got angry, really angry, and he said, "Do you have any idea how much I spent on this trip? How much time I invested in planning everything perfectly? And this is how you thank me? By being ungrateful and demanding." And once again, I found myself apologizing. Once again, I was the one in the wrong. Once again, my perfectly reasonable desire to have some say in my own honeymoon was reframed as selfishness and ingratitude. We took the boat tour, and I spent the entire time feeling miserable and resentful, feeling like a child being dragged along on a parent's vacation rather than an adult on her honeymoon with her new husband. And Marcus seemed completely oblivious to my unhappiness. Or maybe he just didn't care. Maybe my happiness had never been the point. Maybe the whole relationship had always been about his needs, his desires, his vision of how things should be, and I was just a supporting character in his story, expected to play my role without complaint or deviation. I started to realize that the humiliation at the wedding wasn't an anomaly, wasn't a one-time mistake brought on by nerves or stress. It was actually a warning, a preview of what my life was going to be like, a declaration of how Marcus saw me and how he intended to treat me, and I had ignored it, had made excuses for it, had walked right into the trap with my eyes wide open. Have you ever felt trapped in a situation of your own making, where you knew you made the wrong choice but felt like you couldn't admit it, couldn't back out, couldn't start over? Tell me in the comments if you've experienced this, because I think a lot of us stay in bad situations far longer than we should because we're embarrassed to admit we were wrong, because we don't want to look foolish or weak, because we've already invested so much that walking away feels like wasting all that time and energy and emotion. When we returned from the honeymoon, Marcus wanted to move into a new apartment, one he had apparently been looking at without telling me, and when he took me to see it, I realized it was in a completely different part of the city, far away from my job, far away from my friends and family, far away from everything familiar and comfortable. And when I expressed concern about the location, he had all these logical reasons why it made sense, why it was a better neighborhood, why it was a smarter, financial decision, why my objections were emotional and irrational, and I let him convince me. I let him uproot my entire life and isolate me from my support system, and I even thanked him for taking care of everything, for making the difficult decisions so I didn't have to. The isolation happened gradually, so gradually that I didn't even notice it at first. Marcus would make comments about my friends, pointing out their flaws, questioning their motives, suggesting that they were jealous of our relationship or didn't have my best interests at heart, and slowly I started seeing my friends less and less, started declining invitations, started choosing to stay home with Marcus instead of maintaining my own social life, and he praised me for this, told me I was finally growing up and learning what really mattered, told me that couples who spend all their time with other people instead of each other don't have strong marriages. And I believed him. I actually believed that cutting myself off from everyone who cared about me was a sign of commitment and maturity rather than what it really was, which was abuse, which was control, which was the systematic destruction of my identity and autonomy. My job became another source of conflict. I worked as a marketing coordinator at a mid-size firm. It wasn't glamorous, but I enjoyed it. I was good at it. I had great relationships with my colleagues. But Marcus started making comments about how I could do better, how I was underemployed, how I wasn't living up to my potential. And at first, I thought he was being supportive, encouraging me to aim higher. But then he started suggesting that maybe I should quit, that maybe I should take some time to figure out what I really wanted to do, that his salary was more than enough to support us both. And when I said I liked my job, that I didn't want to quit, he accused me of not trusting him to provide for me, of being too independent, of not understanding what marriage meant, and he wore me down, day after day, week after week, until finally I agreed to quit. I gave up my job, my income, my independence, my identity outside of being his wife. Quitting my job was the worst mistake I made, worse even than marrying him in the first place, because once I didn't have my own income, once I was completely financially dependent on him, the control intensified exponentially. Suddenly he had opinions about how I spent money, what I bought, where I went, who I saw, how I spent my time. Every single aspect of my life became subject to his approval. And if I wanted to buy something, anything, even something small and inexpensive, I had to ask. Him first had to justify why I needed it, had to listen to a lecture about responsible spending, and how I didn't understand the value of money because I wasn't earning any. I became a shell of myself. I stopped having opinions because they were always wrong. I stopped making decisions because they were always bad. I stopped reaching out to friends because Marcus would interrogate me afterward about what we talked about and whether they were saying negative things about him. I stopped doing things I enjoyed because he had convinced me that my hobbies were childish and my interests were silly. And I spent my days trying to anticipate his needs, trying to avoid his criticism, trying to be perfect enough that maybe he would be satisfied. Maybe he would be proud of me. Maybe he would love me the way I thought he had loved me in the beginning. The truly terrifying thing was how normal it all felt after a while, how I adjusted to this diminished version of myself, how I accepted that this was just how marriage was, how I convinced myself that every couple goes through rough patches, that every relationship requires sacrifice, that I just needed to try harder, be better, grow up, and then everything would be fine. Marcus was careful. He never hit me, never left physical marks. He knew that physical abuse would be harder to rationalize and explain away, so instead he used words, used emotional manipulation, used control, used isolation, used financial dependence, used every psychological weapon at his disposal to break me down and remake me into someone who would never question him, never challenge him, never leave him. About 6 months into our marriage, I accidentally ran into Sarah at the grocery store. I hadn't seen her since the wedding, hadn't returned her calls or texts, had let our friendship dissolve because it was easier than dealing with Marcus's negativity about her. And when she saw me, her face went through about 15 different emotions: shock, concern, sadness, anger, and she pulled me into a hug, and I started crying right there in the produce section, sobbing into her shoulder like I had been holding it in for months, which I had. And she said, "Let's go get coffee, let's talk." And I knew I shouldn't. Knew Marcus would be angry if he found out. But I agreed. I went with her, and for 2 hours I sat in a coffee shop and pretended everything was fine, made excuses for why I had been so distant, claimed I was just busy adjusting to married life, insisted that Marcus was wonderful and I was happy, and I could see that she didn't believe me, could see that she wanted to push harder, wanted to tell me what she really thought, But she also knew that pushing too hard would drive me away completely, so she just held my hand and said, "I love you, and I'm here whenever you need me. No matter what, no judgment." And I will never forget the kindness in her eyes, the way she gave me a lifeline even though I wasn't ready to grab it. After that encounter, I felt something shift inside me, some tiny spark of awareness that had been buried under months of gaslighting and manipulation. And I started paying attention differently, started noticing patterns, started seeing our relationship with slightly clearer eyes. And what I saw terrified me because I realized I had become exactly the kind of woman I used to feel sorry for, the kind who stays with a man who treats her badly, who makes excuses for inexcusable behavior, who loses herself completely in trying to please someone who will never be pleased. Marcus's control extended into every corner of my existence. He monitored my phone, my email, my social media. He needed to know where I was and who I was with at all times. He would call me multiple times a day, ostensibly to check in, but really to verify my location and activities. And if I didn't answer immediately, there would be consequences, questions, accusations, lectures about responsibility and respect. The few times I tried to push back, tried to establish any kind of boundary or assert any kind of independence, he would escalate. Not with violence, but with these marathon conversations where he would systematically dismantle my position, twist my words, bring up past mistakes, question my intelligence and judgment, make me feel so small and stupid and wrong that by the end I would be apologizing and promising to do better and wondering how I had ever thought I was right to begin with. He was also incredibly manipulative with others, presenting himself as this devoted, patient husband dealing with a difficult, immature wife. And people believed him. They saw his charm and his confidence and his apparent success. And they believed his narrative that I was lucky to have him, that he was putting up with a lot, that I should be more grateful. And this external validation made it even harder for me to trust my own perceptions, made me think that maybe everyone else was right, and I was wrong. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was being overly sensitive and unreasonable and demanding. One night, about 8 months into our marriage, Marcus came home angry about something that happened at work, and he was looking for a target, looking for someone to take his frustration out on, and I happened to be there, happened to ask how his day was, and he exploded, started yelling about how the house was a mess even though it wasn't, about how dinner wasn't ready, even though he hadn't told me what time he'd be home, about how I spent all day doing nothing while he worked hard to support us. And I tried to defend myself, tried to point out that I had spent the entire day cleaning and organizing and that I had food prepared. I just hadn't started cooking yet because I didn't know when to expect him. But my reasonable explanations only made him angrier, and he started saying terrible things, calling me lazy and useless and stupid, telling me I was a burden, telling me he regretted marrying me, telling me no one else would ever want me. And I stood there taking it, absorbing every cruel word, feeling them sink into my skin and settle into my bones. And when he finally stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door, I sat on the kitchen floor and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. That should have been my breaking point. That should have been the moment I left. But instead, it was the moment I started seriously questioning my own worth, started believing that maybe he was right, maybe I was useless and stupid and unlovable. Maybe I should be grateful that he stayed with me despite all my flaws. And that toxic mindset, that complete destruction of my self-esteem, was exactly what he wanted, exactly what he had been working toward. Because if I believed I was worthless, I would never have the courage to leave, would never believe I deserved better, would never risk losing him, even though losing him would actually be the best thing that could happen to me. The turning point, the real turning point, came about 11 months into our marriage. I was at home one afternoon, sitting on the couch in the apartment that had never felt like home, staring at nothing and feeling nothing, completely numb to my own existence. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed, really laughed. Couldn't remember the last time I had felt joy or excitement or hope. Couldn't remember who I used to be before Marcus, before this marriage, before I agreed to disappear into his version of who I should be. And I had this moment of absolute clarity where I understood that this was my life now, this emptiness, this misery, this constant state of anxiety and self-doubt. And I had to decide whether I was going to accept it or fight it, whether I was going to stay and slowly die inside or leave and try to rebuild myself. And for the first time in months, I felt something. I felt anger, real righteous anger at what had been done to me, at what I had allowed to be done to me. And that anger was like a spark catching fire, small at first, but growing stronger. And I knew in that moment that I was going to leave. I was going to get out. I was going to save myself, even if it was hard, even if it was scary, even if I had to start over with nothing. Making the decision to leave and actually leaving were two very different things. I had no job, no income, no money of my own. I was completely dependent on Marcus financially, and I knew he wouldn't make it easy, knew he would fight to keep control, knew he would use every weapon in his arsenal to keep me trapped. So I had to be smart about it, had to plan carefully, had to prepare without him suspecting anything. I started by reaching out to Sarah, sending her a carefully worded text that said, "I need help." And within an hour, she was at a coffee shop waiting for me. And when I got there and saw her face, saw the concern and love and determination in her eyes, I broke down. I told her everything, all the things I had been hiding and denying and making excuses for, and she listened without judgment, without saying "I told you so." And when I was done, she said, "You can stay with me. We'll figure everything else out, but first we just need to get you out safely." Having Sarah's support made all the difference, made me believe that escape was actually possible, that I wasn't as alone as I had felt, that there were people who loved me and would help me rebuild my life. And we made a plan, carefully and methodically. Sarah helped me open a bank account that Marcus didn't know about, helped me apply for jobs, helped me start gathering my important documents, helped me prepare for the moment when I would finally tell him I was leaving. And every small step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, like becoming a real person again instead of just an extension of Marcus. The day I left was both the hardest and the most liberating day of my life. Marcus was at work, and I had packed a bag with my essential belongings, just clothes and toiletries and a few items that had sentimental value. And Sarah came with her car, and we loaded everything quickly, and I left my keys and my wedding ring on the kitchen counter, along with a note that simply said, "I'm leaving. I've hired a lawyer. Don't contact me." And walking out that door, closing it behind me, getting into Sarah's car and driving away, it felt like being released from prison, like taking my first real breath in months, like finally choosing myself over someone else's idea of who I should be. Marcus did try to contact me, hundreds of calls and texts, messages that alternated between apologetic and angry, promises to change mixed with threats and accusations, but I blocked his number, I refused to engage, I let my lawyer handle all communication, and Sarah's apartment became my sanctuary, the place where I could start to figure out who I was without Marcus, what I wanted, what I believed, what kind of life I wanted to build. Recovery wasn't quick or easy. I had a lot of damage to undo, a lot of toxic beliefs to unlearn, a lot of trauma to process, and there were days when I doubted my decision, days when I missed the security of being married even if it was to someone who hurt me, days when I felt like I would never be okay again. But slowly, gradually, with therapy and the support of friends who never gave up on me and my own stubborn determination to heal, I started to come back to myself, started to recognize. The person I saw in the mirror started to believe that I deserved love and respect and kindness, that what happened to me wasn't my fault, that I wasn't stupid or weak or broken. I was just human, and I had done the best I could with the information and resources I had at the time. Looking back now, 3 years later, I can see the warning signs so clearly. I can see how Marcus showed me exactly who he was from the very beginning, with those little comments and criticisms, with the way he isolated me and controlled me, with the wedding day humiliation that should have been my final exit ramp. But I also have compassion for the woman I was then, the woman who wanted so badly to believe in love, who wanted so badly to make it work, who couldn't imagine that someone who claimed to love her could actually be trying to destroy her. And I forgive her. I forgive myself for staying too long, for ignoring the signs, for losing myself in someone else. I'm sharing my story with you today because I want you to know that if you're in a situation like this, if someone is making you feel small and worthless and crazy, if someone is isolating you from your friends and family, if someone is controlling every aspect of your life and calling it love, you deserve better. You deserve so much better. And I know it feels impossible to leave. I know you're scared. I know you don't know how you'll survive on your own. But I promise you, I absolutely promise you that the fear and uncertainty of leaving is nothing compared to the slow death of staying. And there are people who will help you, people who love you, people who are waiting for you to reach out, and you are stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and capable of rebuilding a life that actually makes you happy. The humiliation at my wedding was a warning sign I almost ignored, but it saved my life in a way, because it was so public, so undeniable, So impossible to explain away that even in my state of denial, I couldn't completely forget it. And it stayed with me. That memory of standing at the altar feeling small and exposed and wrong, and eventually it became the catalyst for my escape, the proof that this wasn't love, that this wasn't normal, that I deserved better. If you're watching this video, if you made it all the way to the end, I want to hear from you. I want to know your story. Have you experienced something similar? Have you seen warning signs in your own relationship that you're trying to ignore? Have you left a toxic situation and rebuilt your life? Or are you still there, still trapped, still trying to figure out what to do? Please share in the comments below because your story matters, your experience matters, and you might help someone else who's going through the same thing feel less alone, less crazy, less hopeless. Understanding the dynamics of emotional abuse and recognizing the warning signs can literally save lives, can save people from years of misery and lost potential. And the more we talk about it, the more we share our stories, the harder it becomes for abusers to operate in the shadows, to convince their victims that the abuse is normal, that it's love, that it's what they deserve. If this story touched your heart, if it resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or question something in your own life, please leave a like on this video. It helps the algorithm show this content to more people who might need to hear it, and please subscribe to I Live to Tell for more stories like this. Real stories from real people about surviving, healing, and rebuilding after trauma, and make sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring, and remember, you are valuable. You are worthy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness and love, and anyone who makes you feel otherwise is wrong. Not you, them, always them, and you have the power to change your situation, to choose yourself, to walk away from anything and anyone that diminishes you, and I'm living proof that there's a beautiful life waiting for you on the other side of that decision. A life where you can be yourself, fully and completely, without fear, without shame, without constantly trying to be smaller and quieter and less than you are. So please, if you need to leave, leave. If you need help, ask for it. If you need support, reach out, because you deserve better, and better is possible. I promise you better is possible.